Ever dealt with a neighbor who thinks they run the whole street? The kind that enforces rules they barely understand, just to feel important? Meet Karen. And trust me, this showdown is one for the books. That's Karen. And after our little front yard showdown, I knew she wouldn't let this go. I just didn't expect her to strike back so soon. It was early the next morning when I heard it, a sharp, rapid knock at my door. Not the polite kind, the kind that said, "I'm here to ruin your day." I groaned, rubbing my eyes as I sat up. It was barely 8 a.m. Who the hell was knocking like a debt collector this early? Then I remembered. Karen. I threw on a hoodie and made my way to the front door. I didn't even have to look through the peephole. I already knew who it was. Sure enough, the moment I swung the door open, there she stood. Karen, clutching a thick blue binder, the infamous HOA rulebook. She had a smug little smile, like she had just solved the biggest case of her life. "Good morning," she chirped, way too cheerful for someone who had been my personal headache for the last 24 hours. I crossed my arms. "You're up early. Couldn't I sleep?" She ignored me. With a dramatic sigh, she flipped open the binder and began flipping through the pages. She was loving this. "Aha," she declared, stabbing a page with her finger. "Right here. Section 4B. No exterior decorations that disrupt neighborhood harmony. That includes flags." I blinked. "That's vague as hell." Karen's smile twitched. "It's clear enough. Your flag disrupts harmony." Karen, that rule could mean anything. By that logic, your flamingos and gnomes are disruptive too. Her nostrils flared. "That's different." "How?" She faltered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then she straightened, composing herself. "Listen," she said, voice lowering. "I'm trying to help you. If you don't take it down, I'll have to report you to the HOA board. And trust me, they will fine you." I leaned against the doorframe, unbothered. "Cool, let them." That wiped the smirk off her face. "Excuse me?" I shrugged. "Oh wow, Karen. I didn't realize you moonlighted as a Supreme Court judge. If the HOA wants to fine me, they better come up with a real law. Otherwise, this is just you throwing a color-coordinated tantrum." Karen's face went from red to purple. "This is about rules, not personal feelings." I gave her a look. "Is it?" Her jaw clenched. She flipped her binder shut with a dramatic snap. "Fine," she hissed. "Have it your way." Then she spun on her heel and stormed off. The HOA binder clutched to her chest like a weapon. I watched her go, my stomach twisting with a mix of amusement and unease. I had won this round, but something told me she wasn't done. And I was right. Because Karen was about to take things to the next level. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. But that was before the police showed up at my door. Before security cameras caught Karen in the act. Before she completely lost it. Just as I took my first sip of coffee, the peace shattered. Bam, bam, bam. This wasn't just knocking. This was knocking with a personal vendetta. I sighed. Here we go again. A loud, aggressive knock echoed through my house. Not the kind of knock that belonged to a friendly neighbor borrowing sugar. This was a knock with an agenda. I set my mug down with a sigh. I already knew who it was. I swung open the door, and there she stood. Karen. Still in her perfectly pressed blazer, still radiating that air of self-importance. But this time, she wasn't empty-handed. She had the HOA handbook, a thick blue binder clutched to her chest like it contained the laws of the universe. "Good morning," she said, a little too sweetly. I leaned against the doorframe. "Is it?" Her smile faltered. She glanced past me toward the front yard. My pride flag was still there, waving proudly in the breeze, her lips pressed into a thin line. I see you haven't removed it. Good observation, I said, crossing my arms. Karen exhaled sharply, flipping open the binder. I did some reading last night, she announced, thumbing through the pages until she found what she was looking for. And I found the rule you're breaking. I waited, unimpressed. She cleared her throat. Section 4B states that all exterior decorations must align with the neighborhood's aesthetic. Anything deemed disruptive or distracting must be removed. She snapped the binder shut with a dramatic flourish. Your flag falls under that category. I raised an eyebrow. And who decides what's disruptive? The HOA board, she said smugly. Great, I said. Then let them tell me that. Karen blinked. Excuse me. You're not the HOA board, Karen, I said, folding my arms. So unless I hear it directly from them, I'm not taking anything down. Her eyes twitched. She hadn't expected that. That's not how this works, she snapped. I'm bringing this to the board, and when they rule against you, you'll have no choice but to comply. Go for it, I said, smiling. Karen's eyes twitched. Her fingers clenched the binder so tightly I half expected it to explode into a cloud of HOA regulations. This, she seethed, is far from over. And with a dramatic pivot, she stormed off, practically leaving a trail of smoke behind her. And with that, she spun on her heel and stormed away, binder clutched like a weapon. I watched her go, shaking my head. Round 1. Me. But I knew Karen well enough to know this wasn't the end. She wasn't going to stop until she got her way. And something told me she was about to take things to the next level. The next afternoon, as I grabbed my mail, a thick white envelope with the HOA logo caught my eye. I ripped it open right there on the sidewalk. It was an official notice of violation. In short, Karen had wasted no time. She had reported me, and the HOA had sided with her, claiming my flag didn't align with the neighborhood aesthetic. They gave me 7 days to remove it, or face a $50 daily fine. I clenched my jaw, folding the letter. So this was her game. Across the street, I spotted Karen standing in her yard, pretending to water her plants, but she was watching me. She wanted to see me panic. She wanted me to crumble. Instead, I smiled, lifted my coffee cup in a mock toast, and walked back inside. Let her think she'd won. Because if Karen wanted to play dirty, I was about to play smarter. And trust me, this is only the beginning. If you think Karen's done, just wait. Part 2 is coming soon, and things are about to get even crazier. Stay tuned. Karen thought she had me backed into a corner. She thought the HOA's letter was the end of the fight. She was wrong. I sat down with the HOA rulebook, flipping through pages, searching for anything I could use. And after a little digging, I found exactly what I needed. Section 7A, a loophole. It stated that homeowners could put up temporary decorations for special occasions. And nowhere in the rules did it define what counted as a special occasion. I drafted a quick email to the HOA board, asking them to clarify the rule. If they agreed that homeowners could define their own celebrations, then my flag was completely allowed. And if they said no, that meant no Christmas lights, no Halloween decorations, no 4th of July flags. And I knew for a fact that Karen went all out for the holidays. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, smirking. Now the ball was in their court. The HOA board's response landed in my inbox faster than I expected. I skimmed the email, and as soon as I hit the key part, a huge grin spread across my face. In short, they had no rule against my flag. Section 7. A allowed decorations for personal celebrations, and they had no authority to dictate what counted as a special occasion. They had just handed me the perfect loophole. In writing. Karen was going to hate this. I printed the email and strolled over to her house. She was in her front yard, pretending to be busy with her garden, but I could tell from the way her eyes flicked up that she saw me coming. "Afternoon, Karen," I said casually. She stiffened. "What do you want?" I held out the printed email. "Just thought you'd like an update from your friends at the HOA." Her eyes darted across the page. With every second, her frown deepened. Her face twisted in frustration, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth. This can't be right," she sputtered. "Looks pretty official to me," I said with a shrug. "Turns out, I'm well within my rights to keep my flag up." Her grip on the paper tightened. She was fuming. "Anyway," I added, stepping back toward my house, "I just wanted to keep you in the loop. Have a great day." I turned on my heel and walked away, my smile growing wider with every step. Karen had lost. Or so I thought. Because the next time she came back, she wouldn't just bring another complaint. She'd bring the police. I had barely finished my morning coffee when it happened. Loud knocks, sharp, demanding. The kind that made your stomach drop. I sighed, already knowing who was responsible. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. I opened the door, and sure enough, 2 police officers stood on my porch. Behind them, Karen hovered at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed, smirking. "Good morning, sir," one officer said, professional but firm. "We received a report about a disturbance regarding an unauthorized flag." I almost laughed. A disturbance? She really called 911 over a flag? I kept my expression neutral. A disturbance? I wasn't aware that fabric waving in the wind was an emergency. The second officer sighed, already looking bored with the situation. "The caller claims your flag violates HOA rules and you refuse to comply." I crossed my arms. "The HOA already confirmed I'm allowed to keep it. Would you like to see the email?" The first officer glanced back at Karen. "Ma'am, is there a safety concern here? Any actual laws being broken?" Karen's face turned red. "The HOA rules." "HOA rules aren't laws," the officer cut in. "We're here for legal matters, not neighborhood disputes." I bit back a grin. Even the cops were over her nonsense. Karen sputtered, pointing at my flag like it was a personal attack. "It's disruptive." The officer turned back to me. "Sir, unless your flag is violating a city ordinance, we have no authority here. Do you have any reason to believe it is?" I shrugged. "Nope, just a personal celebration." The second officer sighed. "Then we're done here." Karen's jaw dropped. "You're not going to do anything?" The first officer turned to her. "Ma'am, this is not a police matter. Please stop wasting emergency services on petty disputes." I swear I saw Karen's soul leave her body. She was humiliated, right there in front of me, in front of the cops, in front of the neighbors who had come outside to watch. The officers gave me a polite nod and left, while Karen stood there, fuming as the cops drove away. She had lost. Publicly. I leaned against my door frame, arms crossed. "Well, Karen, that didn't go the way you planned, huh?" She spun on her heel and stomped away, her face burning with humiliation. I smirked. Game, set, match. Or so I thought. Because Karen wasn't just angry, she was desperate. And desperate people? They make the worst decisions. And trust me, you won't believe what she does next. Part 2 is coming soon, and Karen's biggest mistake is just around the corner. Karen had just been humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. The police had shut her down, the HOA had backed off, and my flag, still proudly waving in the wind. Any normal person would have let it go. But Karen? She wasn't normal. That night, just as I was settling in, my security camera app sent me a motion alert. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the live feed. And there she was. Karen, standing on my lawn, holding a pair of scissors. My blood ran cold. She wouldn't. I watched as she crept toward my flagpole, glancing around like some kind of suburban ninja. Her hand reached up, scissors aimed at the fabric. I bolted for the door. The second I yanked it open, Karen froze. "Are you serious right now?" I said, stepping outside. She spun toward me, wide-eyed like a deer in headlights. I was just... What? Just admiring the stitching? I snapped. Because it sure looks like you were about to vandalize my property. She stammered, still gripping the scissors. It's an unauthorized decoration. The rules don't give you the right to trespass, Karen. I pointed at the security camera mounted near my porch. And guess what? You're on video. Her face was drained of color. Now, I said, crossing my arms, I can call the police for real this time and let them deal with you, or you can get off my lawn before I press charges for trespassing and destruction of property. She dropped the scissors, turned, and ran, straight back to her house, slamming the door behind her. I shook my head, picking up the scissors. That was it. Karen had officially lost. But the best part? The entire thing was recorded. And I had a feeling the HOA board and the rest of the neighborhood would love to see it. By morning, the entire neighborhood knew what Karen had done. I made sure of it. I uploaded the security footage to our neighborhood Facebook group with a simple caption. Friendly reminder, HOA rules don't override trespassing laws. It didn't take long for the post to explode. Neighbors who had dealt with Karen's antics for years finally had proof of what she was really like. The comments flooded in, some laughing, some furious, all of them calling her out. She's lost her mind. This is beyond HOA business. This is illegal. I always knew she was petty, but this? Wow. Someone should report her to the actual HOA board for this. Oh, and the best part? The HOA board saw it. By noon, Karen's perfect little world came crashing down. A formal notice went out to the whole neighborhood. But this time, it wasn't for me. It was for her. Karen was officially under review for violating HOA policies on harassment and trespassing. The same HOA she used as a weapon against me had just turned against her. I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, watching the show. Karen stormed outside, ripping her own HOA notice out of the mailbox. She read it, her face twisting in rage. Then her eyes flicked up and met mine. I smiled, waved. She huffed, crumpled the letter in her fist, and stormed back inside. For the first time since I moved here, Karen was silent. No snide comments, no threats, no more power. And my flag? Still waving. Karen thought she could win, but in the end, she only humiliated herself. The HOA turned against her. The neighbors saw her true colors. And my flag? Still waving. But this isn't over. Karen's about to make her biggest mistake yet. I was sipping my morning coffee on the porch, expecting some peace and quiet for once. Instead, I noticed something odd. Neighbors whispering near the mailbox, throwing glances at my house. Then I saw her. Karen, standing on her driveway like a villain in a soap opera. Arms crossed, smirking like she had already won. Something was off. Neighbors whispered by the mailbox, their eyes flicking toward me like I was the next neighborhood scandal. My phone buzzed. The subject line? Urgent HOA review. I already knew this wasn't good. I sighed, already knowing this wasn't going to be good. I opened it. The email listed a bunch of bogus violations, things like improper decor and disturbing the neighborhood. It was clear Karen had filed another complaint. I clenched my jaw. She was trying to get me kicked out. And by the smug look on her face, she thought it was already working. I took a deep breath and let out a chuckle. Oh, Karen, you just don't learn, do you? She thought she could beat me with lies and petty complaints? She had no idea who she was messing with. Game on. Karen thought she had won. She stood in her driveway, arms crossed, watching me like a villain in a bad movie. She had filed another complaint, and by the way the neighbors were whispering, she had gotten into their heads too. I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me. Later that day, I decided to take a walk. I wanted to see if the tension was in my head or if people were actually avoiding me. And, well, they were. One neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, the sweet old lady who always waved at me, quickly turned away when I walked by. Another guy who had always been friendly suddenly looked at his phone like he was too busy to say hello. Then I overheard two women near the park bench. I don't know. I heard he's been causing problems. Yeah, Karen told me the HOA is finally handling it. Handling what? Existing in my own home? I gritted my teeth. Karen had poisoned them. And when I got back to my house, I realized she wasn't done. Taped to my front door was another letter from the HOA. I yanked it off, skimming through the nonsense. More violations. More threats of fines. More Karen. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't just about my flag anymore. This was personal. Karen was trying to isolate me, make me feel like an outsider in my own neighborhood. But if she thought I was going to back down, she was dead wrong. Karen wasn't just playing dirty. She was going all in. The HOA letters were one thing, but now, she was spreading lies about me. I found out the next morning when my neighbor, Jake, walked up to me while I was taking out the trash. "Hey man, I gotta ask, is it true what Karen's saying about you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Depends. What's she saying?" Jake hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. That wasn't a good sign. "She's telling people you've been vandalizing property," he said, lowering his voice. "That you've been knocking on doors at night, trying to intimidate her. She even told Mrs. Patterson you slashed her tires." I let out a dry laugh. Unbelievable. Threatening her? Harassing her? I shook my head. "Dude, she's the one who's been stalking my house, calling the cops, and trying to get me fined for existing." "Yeah, I figured," Jake said. "But not everyone knows the full story. She's been going door to door, telling people she's scared for her safety." That explained the cold stares, the whispers, the sudden shift in the neighborhood. Karen wasn't just trying to get me fined. She was trying to paint me as a danger to the community. I clenched my jaw. She had no idea what she had just started. Karen had crossed a line. It was one thing to complain about my flag, to file bogus HOA reports, or even to turn the neighbors against me. But accusing me of harassment and making people believe I was dangerous? That was a new low, even for her. And I wasn't about to let her get away with it. The tension in the neighborhood was growing by the day. Everywhere I went, I could feel the cold stares, hear the hushed whispers. At first, I tried to ignore it. I knew the truth. Karen was a liar, and eventually, people would see that. But then, things got worse. I walked outside one morning to grab my mail and found my trash cans knocked over. Garbage was scattered across my lawn. Great. Just what I needed. I sighed and started picking up the mess, but as I bent down, I noticed something strange. A note tucked under a crushed soda can. I grabbed it, my stomach twisting. "We don't want troublemakers in our neighborhood. Maybe it's time you leave." I stared at the words, anger boiling inside me. This wasn't just Karen anymore. She had succeeded in turning the neighborhood against me. I took a deep breath and shoved the note into my pocket. I needed to think. That afternoon, I decided to take action. I knocked on my next-door neighbor's door, Mrs. Patterson, the sweet old lady who had always been friendly to me. If anyone would hear me out, it was her. She opened the door, and for a moment, I saw hesitation in her eyes. "Oh, hello?" she said cautiously. I smiled, trying to keep things light. "Hey, Mrs. Patterson, I just wanted to check in. I've noticed things have been a little different lately." She sighed, glancing around as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "Listen, dear," she said, her voice low. "Karen has been saying some concerning things about you. She told me you've been aggressive, that you threatened her. I didn't want to believe it, but..." I held up a hand. Mrs. Patterson, you've known me for years. Have I ever been aggressive towards anyone? She hesitated, then sighed. No, no, you haven't. Exactly, I said. Karen is lying because she's mad she didn't get her way, and now she's turning the neighborhood against me. Mrs. Patterson frowned, as if piecing things together. Well, I suppose that does sound like something Karen would do, she admitted. She does love to stir up trouble. I nodded. Look, I just want people to know the truth. I'm not the bad guy here. She gave me a small smile. I believe you, dear, and I'll talk to some of the others too. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, I was sitting on my porch when I saw Karen marching straight toward my house. Oh, here we go. I stayed seated, watching as she stomped up my driveway like she owned the place. Her face was red with anger. You think you're so smart, don't you? She snapped. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, I have no idea what you're talking about, but please, go on. She huffed. Don't play dumb. I know you've been talking to the neighbors, trying to turn them against me. I smirked. You mean the way you tried to turn them against me? Her nostrils flared. This is my neighborhood. People listen to me. I leaned back in my chair. Seems like that's starting to change. She glared at me, fists clenched. For a moment, I thought she might actually scream. Instead, she did something even worse. She reached into her bag and pulled out another letter. With a wicked grin, she slammed it onto my lap. Enjoy your last days here, she sneered, because soon you're going to wish you had just taken your little flag down. And with that, she turned and stormed off. I picked up the letter, already knowing it was another fake HOA complaint. I chuckled, shaking my head. She really thought she could scare me. Karen had just made her biggest mistake yet. Because now, I wasn't just playing defense anymore. It was time to fight back. Karen thought she had the upper hand. She had the HOA in her pocket, the neighbors whispering behind my back, and now she was throwing another fake violation letter at me like it was her final move in some twisted game. But what she didn't know? I was about to flip the script. The next morning, I marched straight to the HOA office. No emails. No waiting for another official notice. I was done playing defense. The HOA office was a small building near the community center, run by a handful of board members who had probably never dealt with a situation like this before. As I walked in, I spotted Mr. Thompson, the HOA president, sitting behind his desk, looking half asleep with a cup of coffee. He barely looked up. Can I help you? I dropped the latest violation letter on his desk. Yeah, we need to talk about this. He picked up the paper, skimmed through it, and sighed. Another complaint. Listen, we've been getting a lot of concerns about your property lately. We have to take every report seriously. I leaned forward. And how many of those reports came from Karen? That caught his attention. He hesitated. Well, a few. I smirked. A few? Or all of them? Silence. I pulled out a folder of my own. Inside, printed screenshots of our HOA's rulebook, community guidelines, and even state laws on discrimination and harassment. I had spent the entire night digging through every document I could find. Here's the problem, I said, flipping the pages. Your own HOA rules don't say anything about banning pride flags. And yet, Karen keeps filing complaints about mine. Thompson shifted in his seat. Well, the community has certain standards. I cut him off, pointing at the next page. And your own guidelines say flags are allowed as long as they're well maintained. So why am I the only one being targeted? His mouth opened, then closed. I kept going. Not to mention, I continued, sliding over the next paper. Karen has been harassing me nonstop, calling the cops, spreading lies, turning the neighborhood against me. And now she's falsely accusing me of threatening her? I leaned back, crossing my arms. Tell me, Mr. Thompson, how do you think a legal complaint against the HOA for discrimination would look right now? His face paled. I wasn't bluffing. Karen wanted to play dirty. I was willing to take it all the way. Finally, he cleared his throat. I see your concerns. Perhaps we need to reevaluate the complaints. I smiled. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. That evening, I sat on my porch, watching Karen from across the street. She was smug, like she thought she had already won. But she had no idea. Because tomorrow, she was going to get the shock of her life. Karen had spent weeks making my life miserable, filing fake HOA complaints, spreading lies, and trying to turn the whole neighborhood against me. But now, it was her turn to be on the receiving end. The next morning, I got an email from the HOA. Subject was urgent HOA review of recent complaints. I opened it and couldn't help but grin. The HOA didn't just review her complaints, they pulled her entire complaint history. And guess what? Turns out, Karen had falsely reported over a dozen neighbors. The board wasn't just investigating me anymore. They were investigating her. She wasn't just targeting me. She had a history of doing this to anyone who didn't fit into her twisted version of the perfect neighborhood. And now, the HOA was finally taking a closer look at her behavior. Later that afternoon, I saw Karen outside, watering her already overwatered lawn. She hadn't gotten the email yet. Perfect. I walked across the street, casually waving. Hey, Karen, you might want to check your inbox? She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Why would I waste my time? I smirked. Oh, just a little update from the HOA. You know, the one you love to involve in everything? She frowned, setting down her watering can. Now she was curious. I turned and walked back to my house, and not even 2 minutes later I heard it. A loud, frustrated scream from inside Karen's house. Guess she finally read the email. That evening, I got another message. This time from Jake, my neighbor. Dude, you won't believe it. HOA sent out a notice. Karen's under investigation for harassment. People are talking and they're not on her side anymore. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. The neighborhood was finally waking up. Karen had spent all this time trying to isolate me. Now she was the one being pushed out. Karen had spent weeks trying to turn the neighborhood against me. Now, the neighborhood was turning against her, and she was losing it. The HOA's investigation spread fast. By the next morning, people were whispering. But this time, not about me. Did you hear Karen's under review? Apparently, she's been filing fake complaints for years. I always knew she was trouble. I walked outside and noticed something different. Neighbors who had been avoiding me were suddenly waving again. Some even came up to me, shaking their heads. Sorry about all that nonsense, man, Jake said. Karen really had us fooled. I shrugged. Hey, better late than never. Across the street, Karen was pacing on her porch, phone glued to her ear. She looked furious. And then, she snapped. It started with yelling. You people are so ungrateful. She shrieked at Mrs. Patterson, who was just trying to get her mail. Then she turned on Jake. You were on my side last week. Now you're betraying me? Jake raised his hands. Karen, no one was ever on your side. We just didn't know how bad you were. That did it. Karen lost it. Karen wasn't just yelling anymore. She was screaming at anyone who would listen. I built this neighborhood, she shrieked, stomping her foot like a toddler. I kept it clean, and this is the thanks I get? She turned to Mr. Thompson, the HOA president, shaking her finger. You'll regret this. You all will. People stopped what they were doing just to watch her meltdown. Even the HOA president, Mr. Thompson, had stepped outside to witness the spectacle. Karen finally realized she had an audience. She huffed, straightened her blouse, and stormed back inside. But everyone knew. Her reign was over. And I had won. Karen had finally lost control. Her public meltdown had sealed her fate, And now, all that was left was the final blow. The very next day, the HOA made their decision. Karen was officially removed from the HOA board. But that wasn't all. She was also fined for filing false complaints, harassing neighbors, and violating community guidelines. And the best part? She was given a final warning: any more trouble, and she'd be forced to move out. I was sitting on my porch when I saw Karen storm out of her house, holding the official letter. She spotted me, her face red with rage. "Are you happy now?" she shrieked. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled. "Very." She let out a frustrated growl before stomping back inside. Across the street, Jake chuckled. "Dude, you actually won." I leaned back. "Yeah, and the best part?" I pointed to my flag, still waving proudly in the wind. She never stood a chance. Karen's reign of terror was over. And the neighborhood? It finally felt like home again. And that's how Karen's reign came crashing down. But here's the real question. Should she have been kicked out of the neighborhood completely? Or did she get off easy? Drop your vote in the comments below. And if you've ever had a Karen like this, tell me your story. I'm reading them all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. And hit that bell icon so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.